Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and welcome to Benchmark. We'll explore a variety of issues involving our justice system, our legal system, and how they intersect with the citizens of the town of Colonie. Today, we're so very fortunate to have a very special guest with us, a legendary jurist from the town of Colonie. Our guest has served the town as a town judge for 26 years, and we're very fortunate to have Judge Phillip Caponera with us today. Judge, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're very happy to have you here today. And as I said at the outset, Judge, you served our town as a town justice for over 26 years.
Correct.
And when did that begin, Judge?
I actually was nominated and appointed to take Judge Frank Tate's place as of July 1st of the year 1975. I then ran for election that fall of the year 1975, and the reason I had to run was to fulfill the balance of his term, if I recall correctly, and that's how it all started. And so I ran in 1975 in the fall, was elected, fulfilled the balance of his term, which was another 2 years, and then I started running in 1977 every 4 years thereafter until I finally retired from the bench. I think it was December 31st of 2001.
Well, Judge, there's so much to talk to you about concerning your 26 years on the bench and actually also what you're doing today. But why don't you let us know a little bit about your over 40 years here in the town of Colonie and your background in schooling before you came to the bench initially.
Well, I'm originally from Glens Falls, New York. Graduated from St. Mary's Academy up there and went to Niagara University. Graduated from Niagara University in 1963. Was admitted to Albany Law School and went to Albany Law School and graduated from Albany Law School in the mid-60s. At that point in time, I was living in the city of Albany. And by fate, I had looked at a house. I can always remember looking at a house in East Greenbush, New York, and put an offer in. It was rejected, and I put an offer in thereafter in a house in Colonie. I moved to Colonie in 1968, probably the best move I've ever made in my life. It's a great place to live, a great place to work, and as Fred Field, past supervisor, always said, it's a great place to play as well. I was then contacted by a fellow lawyer back in 1969 or thereabouts. Wanted to know if I was interested in joining the town of Colonie government and the town attorney's office, and I indicated I would, and it's all kind of taken place from that point forward. I was the deputy town attorney, and most of my functions entailed working for the court, at the court, representing the Colonie Police Department relative to their traffic violations that they had issued. I also worked as a kind of a liaison between the District Attorney's Office of Albany County and the Colonie Police relative to the criminal cases. That criminal court was Wednesday night. I believe it's still Wednesday night, is it not,
Yes,
Judge?
it is, Judge.
I was, after 6 years of that, I was honored to be nominated to take Judge Tate's place, and that, as I said, that started in July 1st of 1975.
Judge, our service as town justices overlapped for a couple of years.
Correct.
And I know in the 8 years that I've been fortunate enough to serve the citizens of the town of Colonie as a town judge, I've seen some changes during those 8 years as to the types of cases and and what is being asked of courts and judges as we move forward. But I can only imagine that during your 26 years, you saw a large change in a variety of different areas. Is that true?
Definitely, Judge. What happened is, as the years progressed, starting in 1975, when I first took the bench, until the time I left in 2001, As you well know, the Colony Justice Court, and I believe there's 1,000 town and village courts in the state of New York.
That's right.
And our court clerk always informed me that we are always among the top 5 or 6 in the whole state relative to volume of cases. The one strange thing that occurred, although there was a large volume in '75 when I took over, what we saw, my fellow judges at the time and myself, and I'm sure you see, is that the cases have increased, but proportionally it's the criminal cases that have increased. Criminal cases take a lot more time than the normal routine traffic ticket that comes in front of us. Again, traffic cases used to be on Monday nights, and then Tuesday mornings used to be traffic trials. Is that still the
Yes, it is,
process?
Judge.
Okay.
Yes.
Criminal courts were cases were held on Wednesday nights. Civil cases were held Thursday mornings. I presume that's still the way it works. As you well know, a lot of the other smaller courts, town courts throughout the state, sometimes they only sit once every 2 weeks, or maybe once a week. Our court, in reality, sat 4 times a week. All right, and again, at some point in time, just at about the time I started, every town generally has 2 judges who are elected. The town of Colonie is one of the few towns that had legislation passed to allow 3 judges. I'm sure there are some other large courts, maybe the town of Clay outside of Syracuse, and maybe the ones outside of Buffalo, Amherst or whatever. And there's one outside, there's a town outside of Rochester that's also rather large. But the 3 judges were required only because of the volume that we had. I mean, 2 judges just couldn't handle it anymore. And as you well know, even with 3 judges, it's quite a caseload.
Well, it is, and of course, Colonie now it takes in about 24,000 cases a year to be processed through the justice court system, which does leave it often alternating between the 3rd busiest and 4th busiest in the state of New York.
Yes, I believe the year that I retired, which was 2001, I believe that the total caseload we had at that time was in excess of 23,000. And I believe also, I think I was told by our court clerk that we were the 3rd busiest that particular year. So I take it things have not changed.
Well, that's
if anything,
for
it's
sure.
probably even got far busier or more busier, whatever, as the case may
And
be.
of course, as you know, part of serving as town judge is not just handling and presiding over 4 court sessions a week, but also involves a 24/7 on-call duty as well, which has certainly in my own 8 years has grown exponentially. And I can only imagine how you saw that that the calls in the middle of the night increased too, and the types of cases that you saw causing the police agencies to contact you.
That's correct, Judge. Initially, back in '75, the state police were far more involved with the criminal cases than they are today. As time progressed and as the town of Colonie grew, the Colonie Police Department grew, and specifically the detective division. And as time again progressed, what used to be maybe a 50-50 division of criminal cases between the New York State Police and the Colonie Police grew to a point where probably 90-95% of all criminal cases are from our Colonie Police Department, freeing up the state of New York Police Department to go and do other duties throughout the county of Albany. All right, but the cases in the criminal field that probably started to advance themselves more than when I first started, probably the domestic violence cases, as you well know. Domestic violence was probably kept, it's one of those things under the radar, if the truth be known. It was always there. It was always there. But certain high-profile cases nationwide, I think, brought it more to the light as the years progressed. The legislature, and in its infinite wisdom, started passing tougher laws. And you and I would have to get up in the middle of the night on a felony charge. That was our job. Whether we liked it or not, we had to get up. Why? The town courts, unlike the city courts, if you are arrested in the city of, say, Albany, they have a lockup, and the prisoner is kept overnight and doesn't appear until the following morning when the judge comes in at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, whenever they start court. Not so in town courts. In the town courts, although we had certain cells at the police department, they weren't fully staffed like the city courts would be, and therefore the judge had to be called in the middle of the night, because only the judge could sign what they call the securing order. We refer to it, I think, in layman's term as a commitment, but it's really a securing order. What's it do? It secures the defendant from the town after being arraigned to the jail, to the Albany County Jail. And without the securing order, the jail cannot accept a prisoner. Okay. As a matter of fact, Judge, you may not even be aware of this. When I first started, if there was a bench warrant, okay, and one way you say, well, what's the difference between a bench warrant and an arrest warrant? Well, an arrest warrant you sign when a case first is initiated through a complaint by a citizen or a colony police officer or a state police officer, the case may be. The arrest warrant is then signed by the judge. The arrest warrant is then executed, and the defendant is brought in and arraigned. If a defendant fails to appear subsequently thereafter, the court would issue what is known as a bench warrant. Well, back in the 70s and 80s, if a bench warrant was executed by a police department, they did not call the judge in the middle of the night. They took the bench warrant and took the defendant right to the jail. And the Albany County Jail used to accept that. That was it. No need to call us in the middle of the night. At some point in time, somebody challenged this. All right, some lawyer probably challenged it and say, wait a minute, the defendant, even though previously arrested, should be given another right to know that he or she has a right to bail, and they got concerned about the liability issue. And next thing you know, now we're getting calls in the middle of the night for bench warrants. Well, sometimes the bench warrant was nothing more than a bench warrant for a traffic violation. Okay, and I'm going, well, do you really need us for that? You know, just set bail and let the case go. Now, if it was for a criminal case, different story. But you probably weren't even aware of that there was a change.
No, I was not.
All right.
No.
So the bench warrants way back when, we didn't have to get up for those.
Because I know I'm routinely called for bench warrants,
Correct.
Which we follow up on, obviously. And you mentioned also in your discussion that domestic violence cases certainly have come to the forefront. I've noticed in the 8 years that I've been fortunate enough to serve the citizens of Colonie, the increase in the number of calls and cases that I get concerning alleged domestic violence, even if the case at 3 in the morning involves an allegation of a violation of harassment. I am called and routinely come over to the courthouse at 3 or 4 in the morning to address the issue in a variety of ways, including issuing an order of protection, which those documents and those orders have grown exponentially as well.
Well,
haven't they?
I imagine well, I knew they grow tremendously. And again, facing reality, domestic violence was always there, but sometimes it was kind of swept under the rug. And many times the police officer would try to mediate what was thought it was nothing more than a minor dispute between husband and wife, girlfriend, boyfriend. But, as I said, some high-profile cases came to the forefront nationwide, O.J. Simpson case being one of them. And also there was an incident I can recall years ago, many years ago, in Saratoga County, where a particular defendant, male, was arrested on a domestic violence charge. He was told not to go back to the house. No order of protection was issued. He was just told not to go back to the house by the police department. Unfortunately, he went back to the house, and if I recall correctly, the young lady was killed. And I think that really kind of woke everybody up. And the police departments kind of got together. The legislature saw what was happening, and so they toughened the domestic violence laws, and well, they should have. But then it got to the point where they were saying, hey, even if it's only a violation, and we would normally not get called, as you know, in the middle of the night on an ordinary violation, but on a domestic violent violation, we were called for the primary purpose was to issue the order of protection on the spot to prevent the defendant from going back to the house. Now, one may say, well, if he's so inclined, isn't he really going to go back to the house? Maybe, but now you've got a piece of paper, all right, and now that paper gives the wife, although there were occasions when I had to give an order of protection to the husband, all right, but for the most part it was usually the wife. Now she has a piece of paper, and if they even tried to go back, immediately the police department would be there. because she's got the order of protection in hand.
And there'd
She
be a
didn't
new
have.
arrest.
A new arrest, right. And I understand too now, if you violate an order of protection twice, it becomes a felony. All right. So it's far more serious than what it used to be. And that, again, is the legislature, I think, responding to the needs of the general public. And it's unfortunate that you need high-profile cases to bring this to the light, but that's the way the system works. All right. But that's definitely the domestic violence cases increased dramatically from the time I first started to the time I retired. Maybe that's why, as I got older, I found it more difficult to get up in the middle of the night than try to go back home and get to sleep. All right. And it just seemed invariably on the weekend there was going to be domestic violence cases, generally only because that's when people get paid, and on a Thursday or Friday, and we tend to go out and have one too many drink or whatever. But there's no question that probably the domestic violence cases were one of the type of cases that increased dramatically.
And I find, Judge, sometimes that all criminal cases, whether they're domestic violence, whether there is domestic violence involved or not, oftentimes can be drug-related.
Undoubtedly.
What's your view on that?
I believe that Saul Greenberg, the former district attorney, who's a legend in himself, once did a survey and determined that drugs were somehow or other involved in maybe 70 to 75% of criminal arrests. Now, they took a variety of different avenues to get there. What do I mean by that? I can remember I had a fellow who had been arrested over 100 times, okay, in my years on the bench. And he was arrested for what? For shoplifting, petty larceny, as we know it. But in reality, and he admitted this to me, he had a crack cocaine habit. He had a drug problem. And he would go to the Colonie Center and he would steal merchandise and then sell it for 1/3 or 1/4 of its value. Why? In order to buy crack cocaine. And I put this fellow in and out of drug rehabs. You know, he'd walk in the front door, be there a couple of days, and walk out. He just had a bad habit. He knew it. All right. And so therefore, even though statistically you would say, is this a drug case? No, because it's a petty larceny.
That's a good point.
But in reality, they were all interrelated. All right. And a lot of shoplifting, a lot of armed robberies. Now, armed robberies, you think of somebody with a gun walking in and, you know, robbing a store. In effect, an armed robbery could be somebody in a parking lot, say at Colonie Center, being accosted by somebody with perhaps a knife, perhaps nothing more than a baseball bat, but that's a weapon. And because it's a weapon, it's construed to be an armed robbery. And again, that person is stealing the pocketbook of, say, a young lady or an elderly lady or any lady or even a man.
Right.
All right. But they seem to go more towards women, thinking that they were easier marks, which, as you well know, not necessarily is always the case. But the reality of the matter is that the armed robbery was really nothing more than to steal money to buy drugs. So once again, statistically, it may be classified as an armed robbery, but in reality, what was the real bottom line to the thief? Drugs. And drugs came, the more that the town grew with its businesses, you would see more and more drug cases. Not only that, but there was more and more defendants that came up out of the city. All right, they would come to the city of Albany, and then pretty soon they would drift into the various towns, whether it be our town of Colonie, Gilliland, Bethlehem, or whatever. But drugs, and I'm sure you have a lot of drug cases today. We'll always continue to have drug cases, unfortunately.
Well, we do, and it's interesting because I was just completing some continuing legal education the other day, as required, which is required of all judges and attorneys. And there was a representative from the Office of Court Administration in the state of New York pointing out that in 1980, in the entire state, there were 27,000 drug-related cases, and now it's 200,000 in the year 2004. And their position was that it had increased 700% overall in the increase in drug cases, which does pose a significant problem for society in general because it costs a tremendous amount of money
Absolutely.
to deal with. And oftentimes when I'm in schools talking to our students, whether it's at Shaker or Colonie, or whether it's our college students, I ask them how many work, and they routinely will at least half the class has some type of job already, even high school students. And I direct them to all of those taxes that are taken out of their check, all these different numbers and letters and acronyms, and point out that the criminal justice system is a very expensive system that is growing, and they, as young people, really have to get focused on how they're going to address this criminal justice system, which is laden with addiction.
It's unfortunate, and I applaud you. I know I read in the monthly Bar Association, the Albany County Bar Association review, that you go out to the various schools. You and I have had this discussion, and you're teaching and talking to students in the 5th, 6th, 7th grades, junior high students, let's say. And somebody may make an increase in, well, why isn't he talking to the high school students? Well, you and I both know that it's a matter of education, and it starts with the kids who are in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And that's where you have to nip it in the bud, because in reality, by the time they get to high school, as much as I hate to say this, it's almost too late in some instances, because it's already ingrained within them. And when did they start? They started at a young age. If you can somehow or other and influence these younger kids to stay away from it, I myself would go out to the junior highs way back when, and I always related a true story, and that story was that I once in my legal career had a young secretary who was 18 or 19, a graduate of Colonie High, I might add, a very lovely girl, very smart girl, and I found out that she was on drugs. She had started with marijuana, and marijuana led to another drug back in the 70s called hashish, something that is common today. But one day, I inquired of her. I says, "Why are you doing this? You know, why do you have to go beyond marijuana, which is in and of itself?" Because the common response I'm sure you get from these young kids, well, what's the big deal about marijuana? They're trying to legalize it anyway. Is it really that harmful? Well, I'll tell you why it's harmful. Is because in this particular secretary's case, she started with marijuana, and she said it just didn't do it for her. It didn't give her the ultimate high. So she went to hashish, and apparently that didn't give her the ultimate high. And unfortunately, one morning I got a phone call from her parents saying that so-and-so, I'll not name her name, but would not be in the work today because unfortunately she OD'd the night before on LSD. 19 years old. Where did it all start? It started with marijuana. Okay? It's like the guy who goes out and has a drink or two, and, well, instead of 2 drinks, let's have 4 or 5, or let's have 10.
Well, there are many people in law enforcement that believe that that marijuana is a gateway drug.
And that's exactly the point of my story. It was a gateway for her, so she thought. Okay. Unfortunately, in her case, it was a gateway to an early death of a very lovely and intelligent girl. You know.
Judge, you mentioned alcohol as well, and I'm sure that over the period of time that you served our town with distinction as a town jurist, that you saw the DWI, driving while intoxicated cases, evolve, and the nature and extent of those cases. Would you be kind enough to share some of your wisdom as to how that evolved and where it started and where you believe it is today?
Well, much to your surprise even, I was telling you just recently that when I first started, the DWI level that was required to have a DWI arrest was 0.15. 0.15, which is almost twice as much as what it is today, because today it's 0.08.
That's correct.
And it went from 0.15 to 0.12 to 0.10. When I left the bench, it was 0.10, and since has been dropped to 0.08. Why did that happen? Because more and more attention is being brought to drinking and driving, and the unfortunate incidents would occur usually with younger people driving, drinking, and the deaths, the unfortunate tragic deaths that occur. DWIs way back when, you know, there was kind of like maybe the old good old boy network, and if they caught somebody, maybe they'd have somebody come drive them home. Well, that was all well and good, but unfortunately sometimes those people would go back out and tragically kill somebody. And we all know that various groups, starting with RID, MAD, SAD, and the rest of these groups, saw the evil to the drinking and driving, and saw the tragedy and the expense. And they have lobbied the legislature over the years to toughen the laws. And, in fact, even since I've gone off the bench, I know that there's now a new section called aggravated DWI, okay, with a 0.18 or above.
That's correct.
But in any event, there's no doubt that the DWI enforcement has increased threefold, maybe more.
And you and I, as judges, have taken a more active role in looking behind the allegations of DWI and requiring treatment evaluations.
Correct.
To see whether to dig in behind that charge in order to find out just what we're dealing with and what can be done to prevent it from happening again.
Yes, because you know, and way back when, again, you know, a lot of people just said, "Oh, but for the grace of God, there go or you or I." Well, you know something, that's not good enough, because we have found out that these people have an addiction, and that addiction is alcohol, just like there's drug addictions or gambling addictions. Well, this was an addiction to many of these people. I would find it hard to believe that somebody would be charged with a DWI in front of me on a Monday night, and the case was adjourned for 2 weeks, only to have the guy come back and be arrested a second time. I mean, I'm thinking, doesn't this person know what's going on here? Well, they were addicted, all right? And so then it became incumbent upon us, you know, we were the judges, and it was incumbent upon us to see to it that this person first should try to get some help, all right? His license obviously should be taken away, and he should go to an evaluation, which I had honor court back in those days, probably still exists.
Still do.
All right, and there were other agencies as well involved, and now you have the Ddp program through the state, which is an excellent program. Everything to try to educate the driver about drinking and driving. I know there's going to be people say, well, you can take somebody's license away and he or she therefore will not go out and drive anymore. Well, sometimes they do, all right, and that's unfortunate. But that's why the laws have been toughened to have somebody who does that to be, now that person's going to have to adhere to the stricter consequences of his or her acts. And well, they should. You know, DWIs are not to be taken lightly. I never took them lightly. I know of a story of a particular judge in another town who had a DWI defendant come in front of him. He could have taken his license that night, and he chose not to. And tragically, within the next 2 weeks, this DWI defendant got drunk again and ran off the road and killed the judge's sister. Okay, I mean, that had a real impact upon that judge. All right, but we have a duty to the citizens of our state, the citizens who obey the laws, that we have to take these people who have an addiction to alcohol, and we have to try to remove them from the road as much as we possibly, within our restraints of what we can and can't do.
Judge, since leaving the bench in 2001, obviously you've still contributed to our community in a variety of ways. What are you up to now?
Well, I was in private practice for years, and I have just before I retired, actually, I became full-time counsel to my best client, Robert Marini Builders. But and immediately after I retired, Judge Cardona from the Appellate Division, the presiding judge of the 3rd Judicial District, called me up and he says, "Phil, I'd like to put you on the Committee on Professional Standards." That is the committee that oversees complaints against lawyers from their clients. All right. That committee is comprised of, there's supposed to be 21 in the committee, 3 are lay people, 18 lawyers, and then of course you have a staff that's headed by some excellent lawyers. Mark Oakes, he's the head of the committee staff, Mike Phillip, then there's a group of lawyers that they investigate these complaints, and they have 2 investigators too, I might add. That takes up a lot of time on my part.
I bet it does.
And I am now honored to be the chairman of this particular committee. because this is my 6th year. You serve 2 3-year terms if you want to re-up for the second. Some people don't, because it is a lot of time. I might add that this is all pro bono. But I feel very strongly that we have an obligation, we as lawyers, to give back to the community. All right, and this is my way of giving back. Although it may take a lot of my time and a lot of effort, I think it's well worth it. And this is something that I'm doing to give back to the community. Okay, and thinking that my past experience on the bench and as a lawyer, I can use that experience on the committee.
Well, Judge, there's no question that you continue to serve the citizens of the town of Colonie in so many different ways, and we're so fortunate to have you here today. There's not enough time in the day to actually benefit from hearing your experiences, not only as a jurist, but also in your current capacities as well. And I want to thank you very much for joining me here today, and so our citizens could have the opportunity to spend some time with you. And thank you.
It's my pleasure. Anytime, I would certainly be more than happy to give my views, whether they're important or not important, or viewed upon as being having some merit or not. I'd like to think that they are somewhat have some merit, only because of the past experience that I had on the bench. I enjoyed being a judge, by the way, all those years. And I know it's difficult. You have your moments, I'm sure. But, you know, there are times that I've had people come back to me and thank me for things I've done. I can recall having my last surgery. I've had open heart surgery 3 times, and the last time was I was at the Albany Med, and I was down and getting prepped for the operation for the next day, and some fella probably in his 30s with a green smock came up to me and said, "Judge Caponera, do you remember me?" And I go, "Not really." He says, "You put me in jail 19 years ago for drugs, by the way." And I go, "Oh boy, just what I need." I'm sitting here about ready to go through surgery, and I've got some guy maybe upset at me because I put him in jail. He says, "No, I just want to thank you." He says, "Because you did the right thing." He said, "I was in with the wrong people." And peer pressure can be a terrible thing in these day and age. But he said, "I was with the wrong people. You made me see the light. You put me in jail for a while and then on probation. So I just want you to know that I went on and went on to school. I'm married with 2 children. I'm now a physician's assistant, and I'll be assisting in your operation tomorrow." So, you know, you never know. You know, you try to help people, okay? And the other thing I learned is initially when I took the bench, I thought if 10 people came in front of me, I was going to help all 10 criminal defendants. You can't. And somebody taught me a long time ago, another fellow judge, if you can help 2 or 3, that's not so bad. All right. If you're a baseball player and you hit 300, that's pretty good. All right. So you have to accept what you can do within the framework of what time you have and what you can do.
Well, thank you, Judge, and I look forward. We'll have to have you back with us soon. There's so much more to go over. I'm Judge Peter Crummey, and thank you for joining me on Benchmark.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.